Dr. Kelthara wiped the sweat from her blue-scaled forehead as she led her team deeper into the ancient structure. The heat on Terra 7 was unbearable, even with their environmental suits working at full capacity. This was supposed to be a simple job, another dead civilization, another routine cataloging mission for the Galactic Hegemony's archaeological division. "How much deeper does this thing go?" complained her assistant Vexhai, his breathing heavy through the comm system. "We've been walking for 2 hours straight." Kelthara checked her scanner again. The readings were strange. Most primitive structures they excavated were simple, basic stone work, maybe some crude metal tools if they were lucky. But this place felt different. The walls were too smooth, too perfectly aligned. The passages descended at precise angles that spoke of advanced engineering knowledge. "Look at these walls," she said, running her gloved hand along the surface. "This isn't primitive stonework. This is something else entirely." The team moved forward, their lights cutting through the darkness that had remained undisturbed for thousands of years. Dr. Kelthara had excavated dozens of dead worlds in her career. She knew what to expect: collapsed structures, decayed remains, maybe some pottery shards if they were fortunate. But every step into this complex challenged those expectations. The first chamber they entered took their breath away. The ceiling soared high above them, supported by pillars that seemed to grow from the floor like living trees. But these weren't made of stone or wood. They were constructed from some kind of metal alloy that still gleamed despite the passage of millennia. "Doctor," called out Zeftar, their technology specialist. "You need to see this." Kelthara hurried over to where Zeftar stood before a wall covered in symbols. But these weren't crude cave paintings or simple pictographs. They were precise, mathematical, arranged in patterns that suggested complex language and advanced thought. "Run it through the translation matrix," she ordered. As the computer worked to decode the symbols, the team continued exploring. Each room they entered was more sophisticated than the last. They found what appeared to be workshops with tools they couldn't identify, laboratories with equipment that seemed impossibly advanced, and storage areas filled with materials their scanners couldn't properly analyze. "Dr. Kelthara," Vexhai's voice carried a note of excitement and fear. "You need to see what I found in the next chamber." She followed him through a doorway that opened automatically as they approached, technology that shouldn't exist in a civilization this old. The chamber beyond was vast, filled with rows of metallic pods that stretched into the darkness. "Stasis pods," Zeftar whispered. "But the design is unlike anything in our databases." Kelthara approached the nearest pod. Through the transparent viewing panel she could see a figure inside. Bipedal like many galactic species, but different. The skin was pale, almost pink, with sparse hair covering the head. The limbs were proportioned strangely, and most unusual of all, the eyes faced forward instead of being positioned on the sides of the head like most intelligent species. "The preservation is perfect," she noted, studying the readings on her scanner. "Whatever technology they used, it's still working after all this time." "Doctor," the translation computer chimed. "Initial language analysis complete. The script identifies these beings as humans, and this facility as a memorial archive." Kelthara felt a chill run through her. Memorial archive. That suggested these weren't just random remains. This was deliberate, planned, purposeful. She moved to the center of the chamber where a large console stood. As her team gathered around, the surface began to glow, responding to their presence. Symbols appeared, along with images that made them all step back in shock. The images showed these humans, but not as the peaceful dead in the stasis pods. They showed them working, building, fighting. And they showed other species Kelthara recognized as the founding members of the Galactic Hegemony. "This can't be right," Vexhai said, studying the translations appearing on their screens. "According to this, these humans weren't a primitive species that died out naturally. They were enslaved." The record spoke of systematic oppression, of humans being classified as a servitor species, intelligent enough to be useful, but denied citizenship and basic rights. They described forced labor, suppression of human technological development, and the deliberate destruction of their colonies. But the most disturbing revelation came next. The humans hadn't gone extinct. They had escaped. "Look at this," Zeftar pointed to a star chart that appeared on the console. "These coordinates lead beyond the rim into unexplored space." Kelthara studied the data with growing unease. The humans had documented everything, every injustice, every betrayal, every act of oppression they had suffered. And then they had vanished, taking their knowledge and their anger with them into the unknown regions of space. "Doctor," Vexhai's voice was barely above a whisper. "There's something else." In the corner of the chamber, a device continued to operate, its lights blinking in a steady pattern. As they approached, the translation matrix identified its purpose. It was a countdown timer, still running after 10,000 years of solitude. The label was simple, translated into dozens of languages: The Return. Kelthara realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a tomb or a memorial. It was a message, a promise. And judging by the countdown, that promise was about to be kept. The implications hit her like a physical blow. If humans had survived, if they had spent 10 millennia in isolation developing their technology and nursing their grievances, what might they have become? What were they planning? And how much time did the galaxy have before they returned to collect on 10,000 years of accumulated debt? The timer continued its patient countdown, marking the moments until humanity's return to a galaxy that had tried so hard to forget them. Hyun rubbed her tired eyes and looked at the screen again. She had been working for 3 days straight, barely stopping to eat or sleep. The human language was unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was complex, with multiple writing systems layered on top of each other, as if the writers wanted to make absolutely sure their message would survive. Min, come look at this, she called to her research partner. Min was the only other linguist on the team who could handle ancient scripts, and even he was struggling with the human records. Min walked over, carrying 2 cups of bitter coffee. Find something interesting? Hyun pointed to the holographic display floating above her workstation. I've been working on this section for hours. It's not a simple historical record. It's a testimony. A legal document of some kind. The translated text appeared on the screen as she worked. The words made both researchers go silent. Species classification: Homo sapiens, designation human. Status: servitor species class 7. Intelligence level: sufficient for complex labor, insufficient for citizenship rights. Recommended usage: mining operations, construction work, military support roles. Min set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. This reads like a slave manifest. It gets worse, Hyun said, scrolling to the next section. Look at this population report. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions of humans spread across dozens of worlds, all working for the early galactic hegemony. Mining crews on asteroid belts, construction teams building the great space stations that still served as trade hubs, agricultural workers feeding the growing galactic population. The hegemony built its early expansion on human labor, Min realized. But we never learned about this in school. The history books say humans were a primitive species that went extinct before making contact. Hyun continued translating, her face growing pale with each new revelation. The human records documented everything in careful detail. Work quotas that were impossible to meet. Punishment systems that separated families. Medical experiments conducted without consent. Children taken from their parents to be raised as more compliant workers. Here's something about their technology level, she said, bringing up a new file. According to this, humans had already developed faster-than-light travel before the hegemony made contact. They weren't primitive at all. Min studied the technical diagrams that accompanied the text. These engine designs are more advanced than what we use now. If this is accurate, humans were actually ahead of most galactic species in some areas. So why were they classified as primitive? Hyun wondered. The answer came in the next set of documents. Political records from the early Hegemony Council showed a different story. Humans had been contacted during a time of rapid galactic expansion. The hegemony needed workers for dangerous jobs that most species refused to do. Humans, being new to galactic politics and lacking allies, became convenient targets. They weren't enslaved because they were primitive, Min said, reading over her shoulder. They were enslaved because they were isolated and vulnerable. Hyun found personal accounts next. Stories written by individual humans describing their experiences. A mother whose children were taken to work in orbital factories. A scientist forced to develop weapons for the hegemony military. An artist who was punished for creating works that depicted human culture instead of galactic propaganda. These aren't the writings of primitive beings, she said. These are complex, emotional, intelligent people who were treated like animals. As she continued working, a larger picture began to emerge. The human records weren't just complaints about poor treatment. They were detailed documentation of a systematic plan. References to secret meetings, hidden communications networks, and coordinated efforts across multiple worlds. Min, look at this section. It's labeled, The Great Departure. The text described how human leaders had spent decades preparing for what they called their liberation. They had secretly developed new technologies, built hidden ships, and established communication networks that the hegemony couldn't monitor. Most importantly, they had identified a region of space beyond the galactic rim where they could disappear. It wasn't a rebellion, Hyun realized. It was an evacuation. They knew they couldn't fight the entire galaxy, so they planned to leave it instead. The star charts showed the route they had taken. Hundreds of ships carrying millions of humans, along with their technology, their culture, and their knowledge. They had stripped their colonies of everything useful before departing, leaving only empty buildings behind. But why leave this tomb? Min asked. If they wanted to disappear, why leave evidence? Hyun found the answer in the final section of the records. It was addressed to future archaeologists, written in multiple languages to ensure it would be understood. To whoever finds this record, we are not extinct. We are not forgotten. We carry with us the memory of every injustice, every betrayal, every life lost to hegemony greed. This memorial stands as proof of what was done to us, and as a promise of what is to come. The galaxy took our freedom, our dignity, and our children. One day we will return to collect what is owed. The countdown timer suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just marking time until some arbitrary date. It was counting down to humanity's return. We need to contact the Hegemony Council immediately, Min said, but Hyun was already uploading the translated records to the secure network. Within hours, the files were being reviewed by the highest levels of galactic government. The revelation that humans had survived and potentially spent 10,000 years developing their technology sent shockwaves through the council chambers. Emergency sessions were called. Military advisors were consulted. Historians scrambled to verify the claims in the human records. But it was too late for damage control. The truth was spreading faster than they could contain it. News of the discovery leaked to independent researchers, opposition politicians, and eventually to the general galactic population. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was forced to confront the dark foundation upon which their civilization had been built. And somewhere beyond the rim, humanity's countdown timer continued its patient march toward zero. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, factory workers stopped their machines to listen to emergency broadcasts. In the academic halls of the University of Centauri, professors argued loudly about the implications of the discovery. On trading stations throughout the spiral arms, merchants worried about what this revelation might mean for galactic stability. Some species refused to believe it. The proud Vexhai claimed the human records were fake, created by political enemies to undermine the hegemony's authority. The military-focused Korthak dismissed humans as ancient history, insisting that even if they had survived, they could pose no threat to modern civilization. But others reacted with fear. The peaceful Zendari, whose ancestors had been present during humanity's enslavement, began preparing evacuation plans for their outer colonies. The merchant clans of Rigel started moving their assets to neutral space, remembering old stories their grandparents had told about humans and their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Far beyond the edge of known space, in a region the galactic maps marked as unexplored territory, ancient machines stirred to life. The monitoring stations had waited patiently for 10,000 years, their sensors pointed toward the galaxy that had cast out their creators. When the tomb's beacon activated, they immediately began transmitting the signal deeper into the void. The message traveled for days through networks of relay stations, each one built by human hands in the early centuries of their exile. Finally, it reached its destination, a star system that didn't appear on any galactic chart, where a civilization had grown in secret isolation. Captain Sue felt the neural interface in her brain activate as the priority message arrived. She was on the bridge of the new Terra, humanity's flagship, when the signal reached them. Around her, other officers received the same data through their own enhanced connections to the ship's systems. "The tomb has been activated," she announced to her crew. "The galaxy knows we survived." Lieutenant Day, his body a fusion of human biology and advanced technology, checked the long-range sensors. "Admiral Park's fleet is already moving into position. The scout group's report hegemony forces are gathering near the old border zones." Sue nodded. They had planned for this moment since the early days of their exile. Every human child was taught about the ancient home, about the injustices their people had suffered, about the day they would return to set things right. But the humans who prepared to return were no longer the same species that had fled the galaxy. 10,000 years of isolation had allowed them to develop in ways that would have been impossible under hegemony rule. They had enhanced their bodies with technology, extended their lifespans far beyond natural limits, and connected their minds to create a collective intelligence that spanned their entire civilization. "Begin the approach," Sue ordered. "All ships maintain formation. Remember, we are not here as conquerors. We are here as judges. The human fleet moved through space in ways that defied the physics the galaxy understood. Their ships seemed alive, their hulls shifting and changing like living skin. Weapons systems appeared and disappeared as needed, and their drives left no energy signature that conventional sensors could detect. On the bridge of the hegemony flagship Eternal Glory, Admiral Kelmore watched his screens with growing confusion. "What are those things?" he asked his science officer. "They don't match any ship design in our databases." "Sir, they appear to be organic in nature," the officer replied, his voice shaking. "But they're also clearly artificial. It's like they're grown rather than built." The human ships took positions at the edge of dozens of star systems simultaneously. They made no aggressive moves, fired no weapons, and issued no demands. They simply appeared, as if materializing from empty space itself. Admiral Kelmore tried to establish communication with the nearest human vessel. "Unknown ships, this is the Galactic Hegemony Defense Fleet. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came not just to his ship, but to every hegemony vessel, space station, and colony in the region. It appeared on screens, was broadcast over radio frequencies, and was even transmitted directly into the minds of those with neural implants. "We remember." 2 simple words, but they carried the weight of 10 millennia. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories by now. They knew what those words meant. Commander Wu, leading the Eastern Fleet, watched as panic began to spread through the hegemony territories. Ships fled toward the galactic core, stations activated their defense systems, and emergency meetings were called on every major world. "Phase 1 is complete," she reported to the Coalition Command. "We have their attention." The human ships began to move again, but not toward the hegemony worlds. Instead, they headed for the forgotten corners of space, the regions marked as empty or uninhabitable on galactic charts. These were places where other species had been driven during the hegemony's expansion, places where the descendants of ancient civilizations still struggled to survive. On the mining world of Epsilon 7, the Karthok workers felt their chains break as human technology disabled the control systems that had held them in bondage for centuries. On the prison planet of Sigma Station, political prisoners watched in amazement as their cells opened and human voices welcomed them to freedom. The humans were not returning as the primitive species that had been enslaved long ago. They were returning as something the galaxy had never seen before. Liberators with the power to back up their promises, and the patience to see their plan through to the end. The countdown timer in the ancient tomb finally reached 0, and across the galaxy, everyone understood that the old order was about to change forever. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the invasion that never came. Military commanders across hegemony space watched their screens, expecting human fleets to attack their strongest fortresses. Instead, the human ships dispersed to places no one had bothered to check in centuries. Admiral Ko stood on the bridge of her vessel as it approached the Tsarani system, a region marked as dead space in all official records. According to hegemony files, the system had been empty for over 3,000 years, its planet stripped bare by natural disasters. "Life signs detected on the 3rd planet," reported her sensor officer. "Millions of them." Ko smiled grimly. "Just as we expected. Take us down." The planet's surface told a different story than the hegemony records. Cities sprawled across the continents, their architecture clearly alien but sophisticated. The inhabitants were tall, graceful beings with crystalline skin that caught the light in beautiful patterns. They were definitely not extinct. When Ko's shuttle landed, thousands of Tsarani gathered to meet them. Their leader, an ancient female whose crystals had turned deep blue with age, approached with tears flowing down her face. "We heard the signals," she said in broken galactic standard. "We heard that someone came back. Someone who remembers the old lies." "We remember everything," Ko replied. "The hegemony told the galaxy that your people died in a solar flare. What really happened?" The Tsarani leader's crystals darkened with anger. "They wanted our energy conversion technology. When we refused to share it freely, they declared us a threat to galactic peace. They bombed our trade routes, destroyed our colonies, and forced the survivors to this hidden world." Similar scenes played out across hundreds of systems. The Quiltech, supposedly wiped out by a plague, were found living in underground cities on the far side of their homeworld. The Mordani, claimed to have destroyed themselves in civil war, had actually been driven to a moon base where they had survived for millennia in artificial hibernation. Every extinct species had the same story. They had possessed something the hegemony wanted: technology, resources, or strategic locations. When they had refused to surrender these assets freely, They had been eliminated from official records and forgotten by galactic society. Meanwhile, on the hegemony capital world of New Centauri, Ambassador Lee walked calmly through the security checkpoints of the Grand Council building. His enhanced human biology allowed him to pass every scan, appearing as just another diplomatic visitor. The council chamber fell silent when he entered. Representatives from dozens of species stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Many of them had never seen a human before, knowing them only from ancient historical files. Honored council members, Lee began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, I come before you not as a conqueror but as a witness. He activated a holographic projector that filled the chamber with images. Documents stolen from the deepest hegemony archives, video recordings from extinct security systems, testimony from survivors who had been silenced for millennia. The hegemony has built its power on a foundation of lies, Lee continued. Species you believed extinct were murdered for their resources. Technologies you thought were hegemony innovations were stolen from civilizations you destroyed. The very peace you celebrate was bought with the blood of the innocent. Council member HFY, one of the founding species, stood up angrily. These are lies. Propaganda designed to destabilize our civilization. Lee smiled coldly. Are they? Let me show you something specific to your people, counselor. The hologram changed to show HFY ships attacking a peaceful research station. The audio captured the voices of HFY officers discussing how to steal the station's quantum research without leaving witnesses. That research became the foundation for modern faster-than-light communication, Lee said. The scientists who developed it were killed to keep them silent. Their families were hunted down to prevent revenge. And their species was declared extinct due to internal conflicts. Similar evidence was presented for species after species. The proud Korthak discovered that their famous military tactics had been stolen from a warrior culture they had supposedly helped achieve peace. The peaceful Zendari learned that their meditation techniques came from a spiritual race that had been eliminated for refusing to share their knowledge. As the truth spread, the galaxy began to tear itself apart. On the industrial world of Kepler Prime, the Tiktar workers discovered that their ancestors had been the rightful owners of the planet before being driven off by hegemony colonists. They rose up against their overseers, demanding the return of their ancestral lands. On the trading hub of Nexus Station, the Quintel merchants learned that their trade routes had been established over the graves of the original inhabitants. They began sabotaging their own operations, unable to profit from what they now knew was stolen property. The university world of Academia Prime erupted in riots when professors discovered that most of their historical records were fabrications. Students burned libraries filled with false information while demanding access to the real history that had been hidden from them. Throughout it all, human ships remained at the edges of contested systems, neither helping nor hindering the revolutions that erupted across civilized space. They simply broadcast more evidence, more testimony, more truth. This is exactly what they wanted, Admiral Kelmore said to his staff as reports of uprisings came in from across hegemony space. They're using our own guilt against us. But the humans had learned something during their long exile that the hegemony had forgotten. Truth, once released, could not be contained. It spread like fire through the galaxy, burning away the comfortable lies that had held their civilization together. The reckoning had begun, and there would be no stopping it until justice was finally served. The great city of New Centauri lay in ruins. Not from weapons or bombing but from the weight of truth. Buildings stood empty as their former occupants fled to distant worlds or simply disappeared into the chaos that had consumed galactic civilization. The proud towers of the Hegemony Council had been abandoned, their halls echoing with the ghosts of 10,000 years of lies. Fleet Admiral Han stood in the central plaza where millions had once gathered to celebrate hegemony victories. Now only a few hundred beings remained, representatives from the scattered species trying to understand what came next. Her enhanced human form towered over most of them, but her voice carried no threat, only tired determination. Look around you, she said, her words transmitted to every corner of the galaxy through human communication networks. This is what happens when a civilization builds itself on the suffering of others. It crumbles from within when the truth finally comes to light. A HFY representative, one of the few who had remained on the capital world, stepped forward nervously. What do you want from us? Haven't you done enough damage? Han studied the alien with eyes that held the memories of 10 millennia. Damage? We have done nothing but reveal what already existed. The damage was done long ago by your ancestors and mine. We are here to help you build something better. The human ships had positioned themselves around key systems throughout the galaxy, not as occupying forces but as peacekeepers. They prevented the worst violence as species turned against each other, protected the weak from those who sought to take advantage of the chaos, and most importantly, they began the work of reconstruction. Dr. Young, the Coalition's chief archivist, worked tirelessly with representatives from hundreds of species to establish what they called the Galactic Liberation Council. Unlike the old hegemony where power was held by a few dominant races, this new organization gave every species an equal voice regardless of their size, technology level, or military strength. The Microtel delegation wishes to address the assembly, Young announced during one of the early sessions. The Microtel were tiny beings, no larger than a human thumb, whose homeworld had been strip-mined by the hegemony for rare minerals. Their entire remaining population could fit in a single room, yet they now held the same voting power as species that numbered in the billions. The transformation wasn't easy. Species that had never worked as equals struggled to find common ground. The proud Korthak military caste had difficulty accepting orders from beings they considered physically weak. The intellectual Zendari looked down on races they deemed less evolved. But the humans had learned patience during their long exile. They mediated disputes, shared technology freely, and most importantly they kept detailed records of everything. No injustice would be forgotten again. No species would be allowed to simply disappear from history. Commander Park watched from the bridge of his ship as the former slave world of Epsilon 7 celebrated its first free election. The Karthok beings who had labored in the mines for centuries were now choosing their own leaders, establishing their own laws and planning their own future. Signal from the surface, Commander, his communications officer reported. The new Karthok president wants to thank the coalition personally. Park smiled. Tell her she doesn't need to thank us. This is what should have happened centuries ago. The work of rebuilding took decades. The humans helped establish new trade routes that didn't exploit weaker species, developed technologies that could be shared freely without creating dependencies, and created educational systems that taught real history instead of convenient lies. The original tomb on Terra 7 became something unexpected. Pilgrims from across the galaxy traveled there to see where the truth had first been revealed. Dr. Young oversaw its transformation from a hidden memorial into a public monument, adding new sections that told the stories of all the species that had been forgotten by the old order. The inscription at the entrance was carved in every known language, its message simple but powerful. Never again will intelligence be measured by the ability to dominate others. Never again will any species stand alone against tyranny. But it was the smaller inscription below that truly captured the human spirit. When you make a promise to protect the innocent, you keep it. Years passed. The galaxy slowly healed from the wounds of its dark past. New alliances formed based on mutual respect rather than fear. Trade flourished as species shared their unique gifts freely. Art and culture bloomed as beings no longer had to hide their identities to survive. The humans gradually withdrew from active governance, but they never truly left. Their ships patrolled the edges of civilized space, watching for signs of the old patterns returning. Their archives kept careful records of every agreement, every treaty, every promise made between species. Their enhanced lifespans meant they could remember injustices that others might forget with the passage of time. A young Tsarani student, born long after the liberation, once asked Commander Park why humans didn't rule the galaxy they had freed. Park's answer became part of the new galactic curriculum. We didn't free the galaxy so we could rule it, he explained. We freed it so everyone could rule themselves. The moment we become the new oppressors, we become everything we fought against. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach. Power without accountability leads to corruption, and the strongest civilizations are built not on domination but on justice. And somewhere among the stars, humanity continued its eternal watch, ensuring that the darkness of the past would never return to cast its shadow over the innocent again. The promise had been kept, and it would be kept forever.